Hello, dear Tara. Thank you for agreeing to an interview for the Foundation to Battle Injustice. And in the early 90s, you were abused by Joe Biden, who was then a senator from Delaware. Please tell us the circumstances and details of what happened.
Well, I had worked for as an intern for Leon Panetta and for a congressional race, and then I applied for a job. And U.S. Senator, he was then the U.S. Senator, Joe Biden, and got the job. And was very excited, thinking it would be a very, the beginning of my political career, and I wanted to have a career in public service. And then shortly into my tenure there in the office, he became, there was just odd behavior. He would put his hands on my shoulder and rub underneath my hair. And it was just odd because I didn't know him. We didn't really interact. He knew my name and that was about it. But this continued. And then he wanted me to serve drinks and because of how I looked and things like that, and said that. And so all of that was kind of like, things that happened in the 90s, unfortunately, with powerful men, where you weren't really seen as a serious worker, but more as, a decoration, and I was very serious about my work. So it was disappointing. But then what happened is one day I was asked to bring him his gym bag. He had forgotten it. And I went to go meet him in the Capitol to bring it to him. And then that's where in the hallway, it was like an alcove type thing, he sexually assaulted me. And it meant the legal definitions of rape. He forced me. I wasn't interested. And it was very frightening. And afterwards, when I pulled away and everything, he became angry visibly. And he does a disconcerting thing where he smiles when he's angry. And it's very disconcerting and scary. He's a very powerful man. So he just said, you are nothing. You're nothing to me. And that stayed with me and it haunted me. And I must have looked a certain way because he took me by the shoulders and kind of shook me and said, "You're okay, you're fine." And he turned around and walked away and left me there after he had assaulted me. And the next thing I remember, I was sitting on the stairs because I was trying to get my legs to work. I was like, I think I was a bit in shock. I was shaking and trying to get my clothes right, and went to the restroom and things like that. And I realized, my career was over in that moment. Like my life was, I knew. So it wasn't just the assault. It was the fact that I had said no to someone very powerful who had the means to make it so my life would be miserable from then on in. And he did. So I told my mother. She wanted me to go to the police, and I did not want to do that. I was too scared to do that. And I did file a report with the Senate, and I went through protocol. I did not go to the press, and I went through, the protocol steps that you go through, and then I filed a paper about what happened, and then regarding, not all the details, but like the intake paper and whatnot. And then I didn't hear from anyone again, except that the press secretary's staff had heard I had filed the paperwork, and he said, we will fucking destroy you. And that was very frightening, that threat. So I was in my 20s and I took it very seriously. And then went from there. The paperwork apparently is sealed in the University of Delaware. And I believe an organization called Judicial Watch or something sued to try to get those files open. And Joe Biden refuses, and the university says it won't release those files until long after he's not in office any longer, because they said it's not in the public interest. I have tried to get the papers. I've tried to FOIA. It's called Freedom of Information Act, but it doesn't apply to the University of Delaware where he has them sealed. So we can't get the paperwork that would show that I filed this. I was immediately forced to resign. I was told I wasn't a good fit. Obviously, they didn't want me there. My duties were stripped, things like that. And then I was unable to get another job on the Hill on, So I ended up working for a state senator in California, and then went on with my career doing other things. But it was a very trying time. And when I came forward in 2019, I came forward because 7 other women came forward. One of them was a young politician named Lucy Flores. You don't hear of her now because her life, when she came forward after that, her political career was ruined by him, by his machine. But she told, she described his inappropriate behavior. And when I saw her getting torn up in the press, my daughter at this time was grown, and I decided I needed to step forward. He wasn't the candidate yet in 2019. It wasn't until 2020 that he was for sure the candidate, but I was coming forward anyway. And from there, it was a mess. I went to an organization called Time's Up, which is an organization that helps when someone comes forward about sexual misconduct from a powerful person, and they're supposed to help with legal and PR and things like that. And what they didn't tell me when I went to them for help is that they were already working for Joe Biden. And over a period of time, while I was talking to them, their organization received, well, that PR firm that worked with the organization received over $1 million some dollars. He spent 2.2 million, according to FEC records, to silence my story and others, like the Hunter Biden laptop. He spent money on that as well. So it was like coming forward against a machine. And luckily, there were some people that stood with me and stood by me, like Rose McGowan, who was very outspoken. But the Me Too movement wasn't there. And because that was mostly co-opted by Democrats, the Democratic Party in our country. And they really have the sway of the media, which I think that Russia is familiar with because of Russophobia and the way they've been propagating this negative campaign towards Russia for a long time, but particularly since 2016. And when they see you as a threat, whether you're a country or an individual citizen, that machine goes into operation. And so I lost my housing, I lost my work, I lost my reputation, I had death threats, I had 2 attempts on my life. It was pretty awful. I had the Department of Justice take all of my social media and my personal information under sealed warrants. I don't know why to this day. They simply invade my privacy. So it's been difficult.
Please tell us what's the reaction of the American public and the media after your allegations of sexual abuse by Biden in 1993 at the Capitol Hill?
Well, the media didn't find out until 2019. As I said, I didn't go forward. However, my mother made an anonymous call to the Larry King show in 1993 without me knowing. And that actually came up during 2019 and 2020 when they were looking at my allegations about Joe Biden and my history with him. And, they played the call several times where she was talking about it in vague terms, but she talked about it. And it was considered like a piece of, corroborating evidence, if you will, about, and then there was also, I had a restraining order against my ex-husband, and he talked about the sexual harassment or something that I was traumatized in Joe Biden's office. So that was on the record from 1993, and it was a legal document. So there was my friends who I had told at the time who were willing to, verify that. So I had a lot of corroborating evidence, but the media in the West, and I think, I think any person in Russia would know how they are. It's very controlled. Only 22 companies own all of the Western media, which is a very small amount. It's very, there's a narrative, and they go with that narrative. And it's gotten really bad, I think, in the last, I'd say last decade and a half. I think it's gotten more and more siphoned as far as what information is allowed. And I mean, the censorship of RT is an example of that. We're supposed to be freedom of speech and you know, it's a democracy. We're supposed to have all these conflicting ideas and hash it out and whatever. It's not like that. It's very controlled. You know, we are very controlled, and you know, people that try to speak out end up imprisoned or deplatformed or disappeared, or, you know, like me, they damage your reputation. Scott Ritter is an example of what they did to him when he whistle blew about there was no weapons of mass destruction, you know. So for me, what they did was they tried to drag my reputation. They tried to slut shame me, class shame me. They called me a Russian asset because I've always been very outspoken in support of Russia. I've always been very outspoken about Vladimir Putin, saying that he's a good president, I think, of that country, of Russia. And I just said, you know, I just basically wrote an essay about the fact that he's doing what a good president would do. So he's not bending a knee to the West or Western hegemony. And I think that his speech in 2007 was very remarkable. And it touched many US citizens that watched it and really understood the American imperialism had gone so far that it was good to hear another voice say, we need, you know, a multipolar world, we need a different world. So anyway, I've always had that view to that extent, that I think that there's too much American imperialism, if you will. So they pulled on my writings and said that I was a Russian agent just to change the subject.
Right.
And then, as I mentioned, he had a public relations firm that he paid $2.2 million to minimum. There was more money paid out to suppress the history between us, and also to do hit pieces, opinion pieces. And, you know, they did everything from, say, I was a bad person because I filed bankruptcy. You know, a lot of people file bankruptcy in the United States. It's really hard to live here if you're working class. This is a very tough place. This isn't, the American dream isn't like the 1950s. It's very hard unless you're money here. And I just think that it was remarkable that the Democratic Party, is supposed to be known for women's rights and and all of this, but they're not. And so what I really saw was the media here for the first time in a way I never had before in my life, when they came after me with just outright lies about me, to try to discredit me, so that even if people thought, oh, maybe Joe Biden did this, they wouldn't care, right? That was the goal. So it was hard. And like I said, I lost everything coming forward. But I kept my dignity and I kept my integrity, and that's important. And I think that's what survivors want to do, is they want to be able to tell the truth. And
I hate what they did to you. It's terrible. What do you think is the reason for the total silence of the American media and human rights organization that refused to help you fight for your rights? Does this mean that there are no free and independent media and human rights defenders in the United States?
I think that there is a lot of fear right now in the United States. If you make the Clintons or the Bidens, it's almost like a mafia. If you make that power elite, let's call them what they are, predator class elite, right? Vanessa Beeley is an investigative reporter that coined that term, and I really think it's accurate. They are the predator class. I mean, it's like Time's Up, that organization that does kind of similar work to what you're trying to do, only they have a lot of money, right? They were just a catch and kill for powerful men. And so they got caught. They've now been dismantled. But there's really not very many organizations for survivors to go to. And I think you look at what the US has been doing in other countries, I don't even know how they can moralize or talk about human rights when, you know, Iraq, Iran, funding of the, you know, bombing in Yemen, Afghanistan, we could go on. The list is long, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so my personal horrible experience is very small compared to what other people have gone through. And unfortunately, there has been a co-opting of the media by a political party and by the intelligence services. I really think that the intelligence services and the military industrial complex have kind of taken the wheel, so to speak.
Your experience, even though you call it small, is actually a perfect example what happens when this crime doesn't get punished and the criminal moves on and commits bigger and bigger crime. Now it's crimes against countries, millions of people, because one crime back then was not punished, he was not stopped. After the Democratic Party came to power, politicians launched a campaign against you, accusing you of slander and perjury, and law enforcement officers refused to accept your complaints, which is gross violation of your rights. Please tell us what you have managed to achieve in struggle for justice, given the circumstances mentioned.
Well, there's never really been an investigation, but what I have been able to do is, and I would say this to any survivor in any circumstances, to not let yourself be intimidated. The death threats, you know, I started getting, I don't know, used to them, I guess. I mean, I still get them, whatever, but I just kind of, you learn to live with it. But I guess what I would say is, for instance, with law enforcement, I was outside the criminal statute of limitations. However, the Congress can still investigate him, and they're gearing up to do that now. So I have said that I would go under oath if I'm called to testify against him and talk about the corruption and what I observed and what happened to me. So hopefully those congressional hearings will go forward. And as far as, you know, I've been able to do writing. RT kind of picked me up off the ground. I was really going through it. And I reached out to them to do op-eds, and I tried to different publications. Nobody would take my op-eds, and RT published my op-eds, and they were really wonderful to me. And again, you know, I have that heart connection to Russia, and I think I always will, because they were very helpful to me and kind at a time when nobody was. And really saw me as a whole person, just Joe Biden's accuser. They saw that I had a law degree, that I could write, that I could function and be useful in the world. And that meant so much to me. It really did. So I wrote the book, Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. I wrote op-eds for RT, and then I started a podcast called The Politics of Survival, and I do that now.
That's beautiful. For what reason do the American media justify sexual harassment and direct sexual violence by members of the Democratic Party of the United States against women, while in every possible way they bring to the fore abuse by representatives of the conservative camp? Why does American justice put party affiliation above the letter of law?
You know, I really think it's a distraction because, and there's a deeper issue here, right? They make it like a football team, red team, blue team, you know, red team's the conservatives, blue team's the Democrats. The Democrats aren't interested in women's rights. They've made that clear. They have members of Congress that are very misogynistic. They're very, you know, that are criminals, right? Out and out. And, you know, the Republicans may have their own corruption. I'm not involved with their party. I had worked for Democrats, so I can only speak to my experience with that. And I did get trained by Homeland Security. So I worked with domestic violence victims, and I was a train the trainer. So I trained military, police, and trained police about domestic violence. And I was around people with a lot of different thoughts, but there is really almost a brainwashing and propaganda that goes on. And it's been called, like Rose McGowan coined the phrase, she just said, they're cults. They're almost like political cults, cult of personality or whatever. And I would say that's true. And they just weaponize the PR. And all of this, not to sound conspiratorial, but I really think this is true, goes to intelligence services. I think really they're in control. And I say that because if you look at CSNBC, you look at CNN, they're mostly CIA agents. In fact, I think there was one I saw, and I know she's an intelligence agent, that was up on a stage interviewing Vladimir Putin. and she was for CSNBC. And I was like, wow, that's an intelligence officer. That's not a reporter.
Right.
Yeah, but that's how infiltrated they are.
Yeah.
And it's very scary because they profit from war. They profit with Raytheon companies, weapons manufacturers like that. So getting back to women's rights and my particular case, they will go, the Democrats will make sure there's article after article and opinion piece after opinion piece just downing Donald Trump for everything he's ever done or said or whatever. But if you say anything about Joe Biden, there's silence. And he got caught on a hot mic recently, Joe Biden did, and he said, "No one fucks with a Biden." That he's the president of the United States saying that crude statement. No one fucks with a Biden, really? That's like mafia. That's
Mhm.
a mafia state. That's not a democratic state.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion on that.
How is it possible that in the United States there is a whole cast of politicians who allow themselves to harass their employees? For example, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, Michael Bloomberg, and many others.
It's a great amount of resources, right? It's a great amount of monetary resources. And I think in a way too, they're puppets, like I said, for the workings behind the scenes. You have right now, we have the largest wealth gap, right? The very, very rich and the very, very poor, and not very much of the middle class. Whenever a country comes to that point, there comes a breaking point where it collapses. And we are this close to that. I think that what you're seeing is the end of an empire, sort of, and there's signs of that. I believe, and so do many people that are, observers of political, science and history, that really the future is the East and multipolar world. What's really sad is if our leaders would simply cooperate with other countries, like with BRICS, or like if, in other words, develop economic inroads where there's partnerships and innovation, we would have so much more, wealth distributed more evenly, I believe. Because there would be a balance. And right now we're just experiencing this imbalance of wealth and imbalance of power. And now you're seeing war that's almost bringing us to a global conflict because there's no inroads for peace or diplomacy. And I do not blame Russia because Russia has tried. Russia has tried diplomacy, and the US doesn't. The people that are in power right now, the Anthony Blinkens, the Victoria Nulands, the Biden administration, they're not listening and they're not trying. They're simply enriching themselves with money and power. And that's it.
Why has the country of lawyers still not found justice for high-ranking rapists, as happened in Israel when the former president of the country was given a real criminal sentence for sexual crimes?
I think because there's a thing here where it's like you can buy yourself you can buy yourself justice. Like if you have enough money, you can get out of it. I think you're seeing it right now at play with Cuomo. He had criminal charges he was found guilty of these things, and he's not going to do a minute in jail. And there were multiple, right? He lost his position as governor, but he didn't go to jail. With Biden, they didn't even investigate. And with Clinton, he raped Juanita Broaddrick. And there was a police report, there was photos, there was nothing done to him. So I think that rape culture is kind of it's institutionalized, unfortunately, in American culture. And what's really confusing and frustrating, I think, for people looking on the outside in is they're like, but you talk about women's rights and you talk about all of this. It's for show. It's an image. It's not real.
Is there any hope that the current American President Joe Biden will answer for subjecting you to sexual harassment and condemning you not only to long-term psychological trauma, but also actually provoked a massive false campaign by the largest media against you?
I'm a very strong person, and I believe that you know, healing is not necessarily linear. It's, you know, it's a path. And I believe, you know, there's a spiritual part of me that will never be broken. You know, I'm a child of God, and, you know, we're all children of God. And I just really believe in my heart that this happened for a reason, and my speaking out will help protect others maybe, and bring light to his corruption, part of his corruption. Some of it's economic, some of it's what happened to me. But I really believe that it was imperative that I spoke out and tried to tell people. And in 2019, there's interviews with me where in 2020 where I said if Joe Biden becomes president, he would take us to war with Russia. And someone said, "Don't say that. It makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist." And I said, I heard his attitudes when I worked there. It was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. I heard, you know, I know the people around him, and they're hawks. And just by my analysis, my education, and my background, I can tell you that's where he's heading. And look where we are. We're on the brink. And, you know, coming back to the hope part, I've let go of justice. Like, that might not happen for me, but it'll happen for other people by me speaking out. And what I'm trying to show is that media, that massive glob of media that tried to come after me, if that playbook that they use to try to discredit people and destroy them doesn't work anymore, they can't use it anymore. So I'm making a success of my life. And I think that's the best revenge, right? Is just to have your integrity, to have your soul, and to do good work, and to move forward.
You're such a beautiful person. Is it acceptable for a person with such low moral qualities as Biden to hold such a high public office? How to avoid people like him coming to the presidency in the future?
Well, I think, you know, there needs to be a standard of, you know, when you hold that much power, you need to have a standard where you're not going to abuse that power. So the person needs to be carefully looked at, and there should be a no tolerance for that kind of behavior. Because like you said earlier when we were speaking, the crime he did and got away with me, he's gone on and now he's doing it to whole countries. And, you know, and he lies, and it's causing problems. And, you know, like, for instance, what's going on right now, this proxy war the US is fighting with NATO against Ukraine, against Russia via Ukraine, you know, who is getting harmed? You know, really, of course, the Ukrainian citizens and Russian citizens are being harmed, but also European economy is tanking. The US economy is tanking. And him and his cronies, you know, Biden and his cronies are getting wealthy. And then, you know, I think since February when it started, but January is actually when the money started going for Raytheon and some of those weapons manufacturing. Some of them have earned almost $1 trillion since that war started. Because, you know, yeah.
Biden's entourage not only rejects all claims against the current president, but also manages to put forward retaliatory ones. In particular, you were accused of sympathies and ties with the Kremlin, as you mentioned earlier. Why do you think Americans see a Russian trace in everything?
Well, I love Russia and its 1,000-year cultural history. I have a cousin that's Russian, and I feel in my soul very close to the culture. Like, I understand it just almost intuitively. I mean, I don't know, but I think I would be comfortable living there. I'm a Catholic background, so I think Orthodox is, you know, it's not too far away from Catholic. But, you know, I love the beauty of it. I think most Americans are like me. They're more curious and more compassionate. But the people in power want an enemy because they want to spend all this money on weapons and military. And so they pick a convenient enemy. And it's very sad to me. And that's why I've been fighting so hard, because I have this small kind of medium platform, right? Because of what happened. So when they started calling me a Russian agent and started criticizing me for saying good things about Putin, I turned around and I said, that's right. I was right. I stand by what I said about President Putin. I stand by what I said about Russia. So if you have questions, ask me. But I'm not a Russian agent. I simply am an American citizen that sees their point of view. And then that kind of quelled it. It kind of stopped. But then, because then I would start talking about it. And, I don't stop talking about it. And I talk about the proxy war, and I talk about, I try to do my part to try to break through the propaganda, because the average person, let's face it, they're working all day. They don't have time to try to figure out, is this propaganda or is this not? When they're watching CNN or something, right? So I really try to educate people, try to get them to watch the Oliver Stone interviews with Vladimir Putin. I try to, or Ukraine on Fire, the documentary. I tried to talk to them about, Noam Chomsky did a lot of work, and get them to look at RT and to look through a different lens. And a lot of Americans actually really are sympathetic with Russia. You'd be surprised. And they're really getting aware that there are Nazis in Ukraine, even though the Western media tried to say there wasn't. They now know. So I think it's getting through. And there's a real discontent with MSNBC and CNN and all of those.
Given the lies and slander on the part of Biden and the Democratic Party in general regarding the sexual crime against you, do you think that the midterm election in the United States can be considered legitimate? Can we expect any truthful words and actions from a person who allows himself to harass employees?
I have to be careful how I answer this. We get in a lot of trouble if we say that the elections aren't legitimate. We get called election deniers and all of that, and it causes trouble. But I will say this, Arizona and 2 of the counties are not accepting the results of the election and won't certify it. So there's many counties that are admitting. And then in Pennsylvania, there was just someone who was jailed for fraud regarding doing work for the Democrat. So that speaks for itself. I mean, it's obvious there's something going on with rigging votes and rigging elections, and it's not Russian interference. It's American. It's within. And if I could say anything, to American citizens about this, in particular, is that we all have to look within and not look at other countries. Because no other countries are interfering with our elections. We have a power structure that's interfering with its own and trying to hold on to power. That's what's happening.